Welcome to Champion Minded, the podcast for those who aim for excellence, not only in the sports arena, but in life. My name is Allistair, author, speaker, mindset and performance coach, and my goal is to help you unleash your unlimited potential and provide you with the tools to achieve greatness. Are you ready to become champion minded? Then let's do this. Hey everyone, welcome to the Champion Minded podcast, or welcome back to it. I'm Allistair McCaw. In this episode of What It Takes, I have former world number one squash player and world champion Laura Massaro. Laura, who's now retired, hails from England and was seen as one of the toughest and fiercest competitors out there. The 2013 world champion, she's one of England's greatest female players of all time and began her career in 2000. She has won numerous titles, including the US Open, Cleveland Classic, the KL Open, and the British Open. And she became, as I mentioned, the world champion in Penang in 2013. She also has 2 national titles to her name and won the WSA Player of the Year award in 2011 and 2013. She was coached by David Pearson and by her husband, Danny Massaro. Now, in this episode, we get into where it all began for her, her childhood, her sports and starting squash, the coaches she had and what she felt was important in a coach, her toughest opponent she played, routines and rituals, the highlights and lowlights of her career. Also, we discussed what she missed most about competing, the mindset of a champion, and of course, her new book, All In, which I just ordered and arrived yesterday. So I'm super excited to get into that one. As always, guys, thank you so much for your feedback. Thank you for your ratings and reviews on iTunes. I greatly appreciate it. And if you enjoy this show, please share it on social media. So here it is. Enjoy this one. This is Laura Massaro. Let's start off here because I have a lot of questions for you, and I know that you're going to drop a lot of knowledge. Also want to talk about your new book as well, which is pretty cool, All In. So we're going to talk about that. Also have some questions that have been sent by some people on social media, on Instagram and on Twitter. So we need to get to those. But let's start off where it all began for you. What age you started playing squash, how you got into it.
Yeah, I similar to most squash players, I think, played because my parents played down the local club. Guess they sort of thought it was a good idea to lock a kid in a squash court, shut the door and kind of go and have a beer for an hour. My dad says when he first took me on court that I volleyed the ball, and he thought like straight away, wow, that's kind of quite natural hand-eye coordination. So he was the big driver behind my squash, really. And I think, just started because I spent a lot of time down the club.
Now, was it something that was like first love for you, or were you also playing other sports, or was squash your sole sport that you got started in?
No, I did a lot of sports, and I think it's really important that you do a lot of other sports. I think it gives you great spatial awareness. It makes you appreciate kind of the strengths and weaknesses of perhaps your sport and what it brings. I swam to a fairly decent level for a club until it would have meant going to early mornings, and then I wasn't up for that. And I also played like pretty much every sport at school, which was great. And I think through playing those team events, particularly at school, made me realize that, I kind of want to do this for myself a little bit. As selfish as that sounds, that's how you realize that you want to be an individual athlete as opposed to a team athlete. And someone else might sit here and say, actually, I couldn't do it on my own. It was lonely and it was boring and it was this and it was that. But I struggled to have a poor game and win the match, or lose the match and have a great game. And I've always played to win, I think. And so when you say, is it a first love? I think I loved squash because I was good at it from quite a young age and I was winning. And I guess that was a big driver for me and was a big driver throughout my whole senior career as well.
Yeah, it correlates definitely with how a lot of athletes started. Obviously there was a parent or both parents that maybe played. I remember a story, I worked with Natalie Grinham for a few years, and I remember this exact conversation. I said, how did you get started? And she said, we would go to the squash courts with my parents. I think it was in Toowoomba in Australia, wherever that is. Um, basically she was that annoying kid. She would go on when they would go off for a break or drinks, and then she would run onto the court to hit balls against the wall. And it started like that as well. So it definitely sounds like something similar. Now I'm going to actually jump ahead a little bit and come back here, because you spoke about the enjoyment or the drive of being fueled by an individual sport, by playing an individual sport instead of a team sport. So that obviously says something about you, that you like to take accountability. You're responsible for your wins and losses. But as we know, squash in England has had a great tradition in team events. You guys have won a lot of Commonwealth team events. You've won a lot of world championships. Was it difficult for you to be part of a team?
Yeah, it was actually, and it's a unique one, isn't it? Because you're very much still playing an individual sport, but you're coming together as a team. So I could only ever take responsibility in a team for my own match. I can't have an influence on anyone else's match, but it was more the stuff away from the court that I found very difficult when we slotted back into a team environment, particularly from the middle to late end of my career. I think when you're starting out, I mean, when I got selected to represent England for my first cap, we had sort of five. They couldn't choose who to take. We had 5 of us inside the top 12 in the world. I think it was unbelievable. So they took all of us, and I was so honoured and so privileged, obviously, to represent my country for the first time, and still was right up until the very end. But the focus and the perspective certainly changed when, you know, you've won several European team titles, you've got, you know, 70, 80 caps for your country. And then I'm starting to look towards winning individual world championships, British Opens, trying to get to world number 1. It became quite difficult because I was quite insular as a player, away on the tour, traveled with Danny towards like the latter part of my career, and tried to keep myself almost as a little bit of, you know, with a bit of mystery. And I talk about it in the book, about learning a lot of that from Nicole. That was how she handled herself, and she was the best by a mile for a long period of my career. So I tried to emulate her, tried to copy what she did. And I found her very mysterious and really tough to sort of, you know, find out what was going on, how she was. And then that transfers onto the court. And I never knew who she was as a person, what she liked, what she disliked, what she looked like when she was tired, what she looked like when she was fresh. And I think that the team environments, I then struggled to come back to being a team, basically. And I'm obviously very supportive when we're outside the court and we're on court, but the laughing, the joking, the sharing rooms, the going for coffees, there's stuff like that you have to do to bond as a team, I found really difficult.
I'm sure it was, because I came from an individual sport as well. So when you would compete for the national team, as athletes, we're very secretive. We want to keep things to ourselves. We don't want to give away our weaknesses or our vulnerabilities, or we don't want to show any of that. So in a way, you're almost like putting up a front in a way, and you don't want to give, you don't want to give an inch or a centimeter to any of your opponents that you're sharing time with. So you had an incredibly interesting career. You just spoke about Nicole David there, who I worked with as well, and they called her the Energizer Bunny. And something that amazed me about her was, actually off court, the most friendly, warm person there is. On court, a killer. Was her ability to just flick a switch, and she would be so focused on the court. And when we were practicing in Amsterdam, for example, obviously I was her physical trainer at that time. And someone would walk past the glass court, they have in Frans Otten Stadium there in Amsterdam, which I'm sure you've played in multiple times. And she wouldn't even know. She would be so focused for whatever time that was on the court, and she would have no idea what was going on around her. But then when she was off the court, she had this incredible ability just to switch off. How was it for you? Were you one of those players that was constantly thinking about it all the time, on and off the court, or were you able to switch off as well?
I think I was, I think I was live, eat, breathe it, which is where the title of the book came, sort of all in, because I very much had the attitude of, I'm all in while I'm doing this, leave no stone unturned, in the pursuit of trying to be the best player that I could be. And now I look back, you know, in retirement, and I'm like, actually, you know, I'm really enjoying my retirement. I've got a couple of regrets, obviously. I wish I'd done this, wish I'd done that, wish I got that title, whatever. But at the same time, I genuinely believe I achieved more than I ever perhaps deserved or ever believed that I could. So I think you have to, for me personally, that was a big thing to finish and know that that was the case. And yeah, with Nicole, I mean, that side of her we saw as competitors, obviously not being based in Amsterdam, you saw the bright smile and the friendly face and everything like that. But that was as far as it ever went for us. We didn't know her as a person. And, you know, unless you were training with her in Amsterdam, that was as close as you ever got. So the focus was unbelievable from her in a match. And I try, yeah, like I said, I'm the same age as Nicole and maybe a few months younger, I think. And she's been annoyingly right there from the juniors right through. We retired at the same event. It was crazy. So yeah, it was a long road. And, you know, I often get asked, what, you know, you'd have probably won more if she hadn't have been there. Probably. But she made me a better player to try and chase her. And she raised the level of the women's game. And if I hadn't been trying to chase her, who knows if I'd have ever actually, you know, kind of got to that leave no stone unturned, that constant pursuit of like trying to catch her and trying to better myself as an athlete. Because she was, like you said, the Duracell bunny. Unbelievably quick, unbelievably, you know, it's very rare, isn't it, to get an athlete with a ridiculous amount of endurance and speed together, and obviously skill.
Yeah, and good game IQ as well. I mean, she played smart. She had all the goods going for her as well. So you know, but you were in a very interesting time, because starting out you were with greats like Sarah Fitzgerald and Carol Owens and Cassie Jackman, etc. And then you moved to Vanessa Atkinson's, Jenny Donkovs, the Grinhams, as you mentioned, Nicole. And then towards the end of your career, it was the Egyptian invasion.
Yeah.
Which I think, if I'm not, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think there's about 7 or 6 maybe in the top 10. I'm not completely sure. But how was that for you? And how did the game change from those, let's call it 3 eras?
Yeah, unbelievably so. And actually, when people kind of say about my achievements in terms of titles, I think one of the things that I'm most proud of is the amount of months that I was inside the top 10 without falling out. I think it was, it was a lot. It was basically 10 years, I think, inside the top 10. And I think that I'm so proud of that statistic because of the people who I was up against. So obviously I didn't make top 10 while Fitzy and Cassie were around, but certainly when Natalie Grinham, Rachel Grinham were there as Nicole and Vanessa, I was starting to get up there. And I learned so much from them. I was really lucky that Fitzy retired and based herself in Manchester. So I played her every week. And even in retirement, she was unbelievable. And then the game changed a lot, firstly, when the scoring changed. And there's been a lot of, I don't know if you've heard of like this, the current sort of match statistics of the rally length is actually the same as it was sort of like, I think before the scoring in the tin got lowered for the women, but it's done 30% quicker. And so that's like what's been really interesting. So it's the same number of shots, but everything is kind of done very quick. It's volleyable, it's putting the ball in short, quick exchanges. And that was where the tin and the scoring really changed for me. So I had to completely change my training with my trainer to get into deeper, better, stronger positions at the front. When the court got lowered, it had an effect of lengthening the court for all those that don't know squash. And the scoring was like no hand in, hand out. So the turnover of points was happening very quickly. And I went from a mindset of, my trainer would say like, okay, you've got 4 circuits at the end of this session, get it out as quick as you can. And I would set off on round 1, like really good speed, round 2, good speed, 3, it would get slightly quicker. And I'd finish with an absolute killer of like a 4th set. And he's like, okay, we know that you're on the right training path when that 4th set is slower than the 1st set. That's when I know that you've gone out, like just gone for it on the 1st set, gone for it on the 2nd set, hung on and maybe dropped off a touch on the 3rd, and then just like crawled over the line on the 4th. That's what we're looking for. And I think that sort of attitude and having someone on board was huge in terms of me being able to handle those changes within the women's game and the Egyptians and firing it in short and everything like that.
So you really had to adapt as you went along as well. I mean, that's one of the keys of world-class athletes, is that they evolve and they adapt before they have to. Which is incredibly important. Instead of sitting on your laurels, if you're number one in the world, this because you've been number one in the world. You're the most hunted squash player on the tour now. Did you feel that when you became number one, there was a weight of expectation? There was almost a burden to be in that position?
Yeah, I really struggled with being one in the world. And obviously at the time you're trying to push that away and deal with it and all of this sort of stuff. But for someone like Nicole, who was world number one for kind of, 9 straight years, to finally kind of firstly get the opportunity to be world number one was such an honor and such a something that I didn't think was possible. But then when I got it, that old saying of be careful what you wish for, because I didn't know what to do with it. I'd spent so long chasing it that I was just like, oh my God. And I went into my world championships seeded number one, ranked number one in the world. And I'm sure you know her actually, like Samantha Taran, first round, nearly lost. I'm saying nearly lost, but was, it was on the ropes there, like 1-1 and tight in the third and not playing great. And had a real chat with Danny afterwards after getting through the match. And he was like, you're going to have to figure out a way to embrace this. It's all you've ever wanted, to be world number one. You can't now step on the court and freeze every time you go on. And we had a long chat and, a bit of psychology and a bit of like kind of mental work to try and figure out how I was going to relax. And ended up playing really well, managed to get to the final, lost really tight final to Nour El Shabini. And, although I lost that world championship final, it was come from where I'd started the event. A real success, but it was hard to deal with that world number one. I saw if you didn't win the event, it was failure. And Danny's like, well, you didn't think that when you were 2 in the world, if anything but the final was a failure. I'm like, I know, it's really brains bonkers, isn't it? So yeah, I struggled with it a lot, and I can totally understand why people do struggle when they get to world number one.
So how did, obviously Danny's your husband and was your coach as well for a great part of your career, but how did you overcome that fear or that anxiety or whatever about being number one? What was the mindset?
I think the mindset throughout most of my career has been a huge amount of honesty. I think being able to go back to the room and him straight after a match like that against Sam to say, what is going on here? Even though I've got a match tomorrow, even though we're mid-event and it's world championships, it's the biggest event, we had that relationship where he could honestly say, what are you doing? This is not good enough. How are we going to work our way through this? Because we don't want to be dealing with this when we've lost in the next round or the round after and go, oh, I wish we'd done something about it. So there's a huge amount of honesty from him and a huge amount of honesty from me to be able to say, yeah, you're right. And trust as well, I guess, and to not brush it under the carpet, to not sulk and run away and go, what are you talking about? Stop trying to mess with my head during the world championships. And that in itself, just talking is huge, I think. And there's a lot of tears and a lot of upset and, working through the emotions of what are you actually scared of? And I was a big believer in.
What were you scared of, Laura?
I was just scared of failure, scared of not winning. That kind of like, well, you've come into a world championships ranked number one seed, world number one, you're supposed to win it. And, getting back a little bit to, well, kind of, is the event only a success if you win it? And we were just mentioning that before. And, is there more ways to be successful as an athlete? Not everybody can be world number one. Not everyone can be a world champion. And I think accepting myself a little bit better as sort of someone who is trying their absolute best and being a little bit more forgiving of myself as well. And I was just going to say, I'm a big believer in NLP and a little bit of kind of like trying to kind of influence the mind in that way, and neuro-linguistic programming.
That, Laura? What's MMP? Sorry.
NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, and the little subtleties of sort of, I worked is stuff like having an anchor when you're on court, a little trigger that you can go to get you in a certain state of mind, helped me a lot coming back from injuries to do sort of visualization in that way. And we did a couple of NLP processes where you sort of imagine yourself sat in a big cinema and you play yourself playing on a squash, or so you see yourself playing on a squash court backwards and in black and white. And over the course of the session, 15-20 minutes, you then see it running forward in black and white, and then you see it running in color, and then you see it running in bright, vivid colors, and you start to actually feel like you're actually, yeah, I'm in it and I'm better. And it's a great one for injury as well. When you've done your ankle in and you're scared to fly into a forehand front corner, you can start to like feel that coming back a little bit more. So just stuff like that I was always willing to do and prepare and try and kind of get the most out of myself after a bit of a wobble.
You know, squash is one of the most demanding sports on the body, on the joints, on the knees, and so on and so forth. It's a lot of lunging, it's a lot of acceleration, deceleration in such a small area. Now, you mentioned there that you're proud of the amount of time you were able to spend in the top 10, and that obviously relates to the fact that your physical program was good. Yes, you pick up niggles and so on and so forth, but you were able to stay relatively healthy if you're able to stay that long in the top 10. And this, we had a question from Robbie Koenig, and Robbie is very, very well known in the tennis world, loves the squash as well. He's actually a commentator for Amazon, and you'll hear him at all the Grand Slams. And he sent in a question to us as well and asked, what was your physical program away from the court? Did you do a lot of cardio? Was it a lot of weights? What exactly was your training away from the court?
Yeah, so I did a couple of weight sessions a week generally. As you guys all know, it really varied with sets and reps in terms of how close I was to a tournament, whether I was in the off season. I think naturally I'm quite strong, not too like muscular in terms of build, but I loved my weight sessions. And I think if you generally like doing something, you're probably quite good at it. This is crazy, and for a squash player, I could split squat more than I could squat, which is crazy. I think my PB for a split squat is 105 kilos, which I think is pretty heavy for like 2 reps or something. Mm-hmm. So I loved all that. I loved trying to break my kind of PBs. My trainer was not big on 1 rep maxes, but 2 rep maxes, and we always finished with what he would call MRTs. This is at the end of my career, particularly. I'm sure they stand for something, but that's not my, I don't know what it is. And it would just be kind of like a circuit of prowler, kind of running the metal prowler up and down, squat and press, 500 meters on the watt bike, kettlebell swings, bit of a break. And I mean, I've never felt lactate in my legs like it. I just, you sit down between your sets, and then sometimes I was scared to sit down because I thought I'm never going to get back up again. They were so full of lactate. So I did spent a lot of time on the watt bike, because obviously that helps with the impact side as well. But it was really lactate based sessions where your legs are just massive and really burning. And then I also liked to do a lot of court sprints towards the end of my career. But I think a lot of people see court sprints as quite brutal. They're something that the Aussies used to do back in the day where, like you'd hear, I've done 3400s or whatever. It was just brutal on the body. I tried to really keep my court sprints very technical, as well as obviously being extremely physical. But it was, very much about a stride pattern, very much about controlling my lunges into the walls, things like that. And there was a direct transfer over to like my power off the tee and my split step and things like that. So yeah, weights wise, 2 times a week normally, maybe 3 in the off season, a lot of circuit based stuff, a lot of court sprints, and then obviously the ghosting and things like that. But in terms of longevity too, massive fan of yoga, paid to have individual one-to-one yoga. When I wasn't doing my yoga and I wasn't doing my weights, I picked up so many more niggles, just tiny little muscular ones that kept me out for a day or so, 2-3 days where I'm like just managing it. And when I was on top of that stuff, it held me together. Big fan, obviously, of reinvesting, my funding and things like that into massage and seeing fascia therapists who's I've been really lucky to have my whole career. So I always saw it as reinvesting back into my body to keep myself fit. And I think I only probably had three injuries that probably kept me out of tournaments over my career, which is unbelievable, really.
Now, I was going to ask you. Let's ask you this question first, and then I'm going to, mention who I would always compare you to, a fellow countryman. But what was the one exercise or drill that you hated?
I hated probably track. Track work, and it took I used to go in such a mood before I would have to go to the track, and it took me a lot of years
to train with Jenny Meadows. No,
I never did. That we've got some great athletes around here. No Jenny, no Helen Clitheroe, but I'm a really poor runner. Honestly, I'm really poor. I don't have the build to run, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't help when you try and run. I do sets on the track and I just hate it. Absolutely hated it. So I would be in a mood before I went down there, and then, I'd get the session done and I'd be like chatterbox on the way back, absolutely buzzing off all the high hormones and everything. But yeah, that'd be my one I hated.
Right. Yeah. Now, the one player that I always compared you to, and obviously we didn't get to meet in person yet, but of course I'd watch a lot of your matches on Squash TV and obviously through the players I worked with were your opponents as well. But is Nick Matthew, and I'll tell you why. I have massive respect for Nick Matthew. Obviously, 3-time world champion, world number 1. He's been on the podcast as well, but I compared him to you because of I believe, and he'll admit this as well, is that he overachieved, as in he, like you just said at the beginning of this podcast, probably achieved more than he should have. But why? Incredibly hard worker, as we know, like you were, very detailed, very, meticulous with the small details, which is something you were, very professional in the preparation, ticked all the boxes in terms of what the controllables were to become a better player. And this is a lesson. Obviously, if there's young players listening right now, you might not be the best junior, you might not be the best player at your club or whatever, but if you keep consistent in those small things like both you and Nick did throughout your career, then great things happen.
Yeah. I've had that comparison a few times, and I think I tried to copy Nick a little bit. I mean, from probably 29 years old, which I know that sounds quite late, but I only retired at 35, just mid 35. So we had the same coach, and I just saw my game being kind of like, actually, I could base my game a little bit around him. And we got fairly close. We would, I talk about it in the book, some funny stories. We'd go away with DP, who was our coach, Danny as well. And there'd be the four of us. And it was like what we talked about before, about maybe putting myself a little bit outside of the scene. And, if you can sort of be with a male player like that and look up to them and talk to them, and he was playing at an unbelievable level. Any time I got a chance to go on court with him, I was just in absolute awe of what he could do with the ball. And as well, I think because I saw how he sort of portrayed himself on court and how he behaved, and we get I guess there's a comparison because of us both being quite hard-nosed on court as well, and both no nonsense and everything like that. And I think I thought it was okay to be like that because he was so successful. And I'm actually really honored that someone would compare me to Nick, because he's unbelievable and has achieved loads.
I remember just watching Nick warm up once and how detailed it was. And his stretching was around about half an hour. Then he went into more core body temperature warm up, and then he went into ghosting. And then it was all just this And those are the small little things that we try and bring forward to juniors, of the small little details that, yes, are boring. Yes, nobody likes to warm up, but these are what the champions get right. These are what the champions do when nobody's looking. And, Nick was doing this in the back corner where it was dark. Of course, me being the geek of in performance, wanting to see what everybody's doing in their warm-ups and so on and so forth, but just those small little things. Let's move on to coaching. Obviously, Danny was what your husband was, your coach for a large part of your career, DP, as you mentioned, but what did you look for in a coach? What was important to you?
I think it's a really interesting question. I think when you're young, you almost fall into a coaching situation that's perhaps like local to you, or you know, particularly with squash, where you're going to be based in the area that you're at. And then as I got older, what I needed changed. There was a period of time where I was working with Phil Whitlock, who was a former top 10 in the world player himself, not very technically based in terms of changing a huge amount of technique, very tactical based, very much around where the ball's going rather than how you get it there. And I really needed that at the time. It was, you know, sort of just crack on with it, put the ball here, get fit, get on the volley, do the basics very, very well. And, you know, wanting to talk to me most days, knowing what I've done, really following up with it, how practice match has gone, whatnot. And then I think when my relationship, which I talk about with in the book a little bit about how that came to an end with Phil, I was sort of at the end of maybe my late 20s by this stage, and I'm probably looking for something a little bit different. As I'm sure you've known, like the athlete starts to take a little bit more responsibility for their game. It's a little bit more athlete led, the relationship, whereas before you were a bit more coach led. And yeah, DP was a perfect fit because, you know, he was working with Nick, he'd worked with Cassie, he'd had champions before. I think before Raneem and Tarek won their world championships, and they're both coached by Haitham Afat, he was the only coach that had coached a male and female world champion. And I think Nick and I won it in the same season as well, which was hugely special for him. And he just brought about something completely different. He was completely technically based, but very laid back as well. And I was the one that was always having to push for sessions. I was always the one trying to keep the communication channels going. And, you know, although that can be frustrating sometimes, I also think it, you know, was something that I needed at the end of my career. It wouldn't have probably worked right at the start, but he was, he brought a real calmness to that, like detailed, dedicated side to Nick and I. And, you know, just would laugh at the two of us turning up, doing a 20-minute warm up for what he would call like one strike. Like it was such a slow session when we had technical sessions, and we'd both be warming up for like 30 minutes, and he's just laughing at us. So I really kind of valued a lot of that. He brought me down a peg or two, which is exactly what I probably needed in that stage of my career.
Obviously, there's going to be a lot of coaches listening to this, and a lot of coaches who work with, you know, 80% of coaches work with junior players.
Yeah.
What constitutes a good development coach, and what would the difference between a development coach, let's just say, working with juniors, and a coach that's working with players on the tour, for example?
Yeah, I mean, I guess with the development side, you're really looking at kind of like a broader base of technical work. You're looking for technical competency and holding up under pressure. With a pro, it's finer detail stuff. It's the stuff that, you know, DP got me to change my grip ever so slightly. I mean, no one would have ever known in a million years if I'd not told this story, and how like upset I was at the fact I was 2 in the world and he was basically telling me I was holding the racket wrong. But it was unbelievable in terms of a 1% change that made my forehand drop a little bit more severe. Whereas with a junior, and obviously I'm only 2 years into my coaching kind of path, but I would have said it's a lot more kind of technical underpinning. It's making sure that they can hit shots, you know, from really good areas. It's making sure there's really good kind of technical movement working. As they get stronger, you know, obviously you get that strength of movement, but I work a lot with the girls, particularly on how are they moving, how are they getting off the ball. As you know, it's, you know, you're all well and good going into a shot, hitting a brilliant shot. If you're just still stood there and it comes back, you're in trouble. So I'm always trying to talk to them about how you're going to get the next ball back, how you're going to play that one and get there. And because the sport is so physical that if you're leaving gaps on the court, you're in real trouble. So and then of course there's an element where I think perhaps, if I'm honest, I probably lack a little bit in my coaching. I'm still trying to figure this out, but how do you get that in-game play? How do you get that in-game intelligence of knowing where to put the ball? Is that natural, or is that something as a coach I can really try and harness a little bit more? How do they know naturally when to lift the ball or hit the ball or boast the ball or hit into space? And that was something that obviously the great Malcolm Woolstrop unfortunately passed away. Like all of his players, they're unbelievable at kind of the in-game stuff. And that's where I want to really try and kind of improve my coaching a little bit as well. So I think I've got the technical stuff down, but it's the skill and the in-game play stuff that I need to develop a little bit more.
Transitioning from being a player to a coach, what are some things you've learned in your coaching career thus far that you didn't realize that you were when you were a player?
That not everybody's like me. Not everybody plays just to win. And that sounds stupid, because I know if you're a professional athlete or a junior, of course you want to win. But I'm also really, really starting to understand that people play the game because they really enjoy it. And that might sound utterly absurd to some people listening. I was like, well, of course you enjoy it. And of course I enjoyed it, but I enjoyed it when I won. So in retrospect, I sort of enjoyed matches. And I like, oh yeah, I really enjoyed that battle and I enjoyed that. But if I lost, I don't care how well I played, I'm not happy and I didn't enjoy it. So coaching a few girls that are coming through, and the nerves that I got because of that from probably a lot of fear of failure when I first started out, the fear of losing and the fear of not being able to get over the line was obviously a huge driver in me finally getting over the line. But it's also really interesting when, you know, players can say, I'm not particularly nervous, I'm quite relaxed, I'm really looking forward to it, I've got to stay relaxed, I've got to play my shots, I know that's how I'll get my best performance out. Whereas I was a bit more like, no, I've got to have my plan, I've got to get on there and I've got to do my plan well, and I've got to fight, and I've got to make myself really hard to break down mentally and physically. And if I do that well, I'll win. And I think, yeah, it's been massive to kind of understand that someone can just go on and just really, really enjoy hitting a ball.
Yeah, it was something that was tough for me as well, is to transition that mindset of, like you just said, they're now just believing that everybody wants to be a champion, as we're, you know, no, I mean, some kids just want to, you know, play the sport, enjoy it, and you know, be with friends and so on. It's always funny if you ask a bunch of kids what they enjoy most about their practices. It usually comes down to spending time with teammates and yeah. other kids, you know.
Well, have you come across that even at pro level, where because that obviously, yeah, juniors is definite, but there's a couple of pros that I'm working with where they would say, yeah, I don't get particularly nervous, I know I've just got to get myself in a really good spot, I love hitting squash balls, I love hitting, and I know that that's when I'm more likely to win, when I'm enjoying my game, when I'm playing. And then I just wonder if the edge is taken off them a little bit when they get into the nitty gritty dirty side of the game, or if you've experienced anything like that with some players and they can still be hugely successful. But
I work with a lot of tennis players, and you know, the generations have changed as well. So if I look at a player that I consult, Lloyd Harris, who's just broken into the top 50 in the world, and he beat actually Rafael Nadal last week in Washington, so he's on a good run. Just super relaxed. Also, you know, yes, everybody gets nervous in that, but he's not overcome by fear or doubt. He relishes, you know, he played Federer center court Wimbledon, took the first set off him, never played in Wimbledon before. Just that like type of like, no problem, you know, as in bring it. You know, we look at a player like Nick Kyrgios, for example, the Australian player. Everything's a joke. Everything's fun for him. And that's how he plays best. So yes, there is those type. I believe that a lot of it comes from your upbringing, how the relationship you have with failure, how your parents see failure, how your parents see success, and that gets laid on to the kids of how, you know, and I believe that creates a lot of pressure when, you know, the parents are talking about winning, or did you win? Did you beat her? Did you, you know, that's where I think it all begins.
Yeah, do you know what? Yeah, you're right. And I think that was where, again, just talk so much about it in the early chapters of my book about that fear of failure. And it took me a long time to, I sort of say, kind of balance out that fear of failure. Started off as a junior, almost crippled by nerves in some situations, where I then had to set off on tour on my own without my parents and without a coach, as the squash players do. You're just off, you know, absolutely like really nervous and still almost crippled by these nerves and fear of failure, feeling kind of sick in my warm-ups and stuff. And then somehow towards the end of my career, like we were just talking about before, the balancing out of having that will to win without the slight edge of the fear of failure, more the drive towards winning rather than the drive away from failure. And I think that it took me a lot of time, and it did come a lot from my dad. And I think at the end of my career, a lot of it, I was still reaping the benefits of that fear of failure because of the drive to win, but not as much negativity around it as well. And yeah, you're probably right. So when I think of a couple of the players I'm working with, without the parents are a lot more kind of like, oh, you did really well, brilliant, kind of, but they've still got that inner drive within them to want to succeed. If the match is there to take it, they take it, but not quite as much of the fear. So yeah, you probably got a really good point there.
Yeah, I think that's where most of the education needs to be done is with the parents of the correct language, the more a kid enjoys a sport or playing an instrument in music, the more they're going to want to do it. And by fostering that, it's not all about results and outcomes. And, look, parents want the best for their kids. So, they've been brought up that way as well. The first question when they get into the car is, did you win? Or, and that is why it creates a massive pressure later on, because, winning is good, losing is bad. That's how they're viewed to see it. So, yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. A lot of times, in some sports, golf, tennis, some of the sports I consult to, a player will go to a tournament by themselves and win the tournament. They didn't have a coach there that week. They didn't have a parent there that week. And it all comes down to just a weight of pressure and a weight of expectation where they were just able just to focus on their own game. It's a very interesting. Now, obviously, I'm not saying everybody go to tournaments without coaches and people, but it's a very interesting situation.
You know what, as well, there's a huge difference from when I started out on tour to when I finished on tour, and even now the coaching side. Can you watch me play? I'm on a live stream. Can we go through my match with, can we watch my match back because over Zoom sometimes if I'm not near the player? And I talk a lot about when I set out on tour, my phone didn't even work in America. I'd have to go to a tobacco shop and get a $10 phone card to ring the landline at home, let alone someone tuning in to watch me play. I'd have to then get to an internet cafe the next day and try and drop someone a message or call home. And it was the middle of the night. And there's something to be said for that kind of over analysis of matches and that pressure that can bring, and the freedom that comes with. I know I was away at some tournaments and I would play horrifically and go, thank goodness nobody saw that. I just lost in everybody else's mind. I just lost. It was just I lost. She played really well. Wasn't so good. I'm getting home tomorrow. Done. There's this over analysis of, I was watching one of my players last week and she's just flat as a pancake. And it's like, you get 3 messages after the match. What's going on there? And you're just, and you're like to the player, you're almost asking the player what's going on. So you can answer these other people that are going, what's going on? And it's finding that balance as a young player who, of course you want to use technology to your advantages. I've just listed all of the negatives, but of course there's a huge amount of positives to it as well. And the communication, I wouldn't want young girls to go away and not be able to get in contact with friends and family, but there's also a really fine line between over analysis, coaches jumping in ridiculously quickly, and actually the athlete just having 5, 6, 7, 8 hours after the match where there isn't anybody on the phone because you haven't got a phone, you haven't got a tri-band phone, whatever it is. You've got to deal with that loss. You have to go through it, you have to process it, and you have to come out the other side and go, this is what I'm going to do differently next time, from whatever perspective, mental, physical, tactical, whatever. And that's not always happening, I don't think, as much anymore. And perhaps that's something coaches could perhaps, encourage a little bit more.
No, that's great advice. It's something I believe as well is, after a match, there's emotions, there's high emotions, especially if you've lost. And the last thing as a player is that you want to get into it with your coach. It's the best for both sides to just let emotions calm. As we know, now that you're in the coaching seat as well, you share the same emotions. In fact, it's even more nerve-wracking sitting watching a player. But just to give it a bit of time, it's something I always recommend to coaches is have a deal with your player of when you talk about a match? It could be dinner that night, or you leave it 24 hours. What is the best for the player? But getting into it straight after a match, usually not a good outcome, especially if it's been a loss.
Yeah.
I want to be respectful of your time, and just a few more questions, probably like almost quick fire questions. But your toughest opponent?
I mean, definitely Nicole. For she was just there for so long, and she rose the level of the women's game, and to try and catch her was unbelievable. So yeah, if I had to name just one, it would be Nicole and what she brought to the women's game.
Favorite athlete away from squash, male and female?
Female. Actually, talk a lot about her in my book, Chrissy Wellington, and I've read her book and recommend that for anyone who's listening who wants a bit of a different perspective. You think you're working hard, go and read her book, and you might realize there's a bit more to go. And I talk about it in my book about how that's what I learned reading her book and thinking, wow, like she is training unbelievably hard as an Ironman athlete. So yeah, absolutely loved Chrissy Wellington. Serena Williams as well, from the female perspective. Male, probably someone like, yeah, Michael Johnson, track and field. Yeah, that would probably be up there.
Of course, I think Chrissy Wellington, the as you mentioned there, the Ironman champion and world triathlon champion, she started pretty late, didn't she? I think she started at like 31, 32, where she thought, hey, I'm actually pretty good at this.
Yeah, I don't know the exact age, but she was working kind of almost, like in an office type job. And just, realized that she, was doing it for fun almost, and just got really good. And then talk about dedication, working with a coach who was, very, very strict and pushed his athletes really, really hard. But yeah, the story I tell in the book is about just reading a story of her doing an Ironman race where she was towards the end of the run and couldn't actually feel her legs anymore. And I remember vividly being on court with Nicole, who, as you know, was ridiculously physical, and being able to say to myself, I can still feel my legs, so I've got more to go. And it won me the match. I mean, it's so hard to beat Nicole. It was in Malaysia. It was on a hot glass court in a mall somewhere. And I swear that one story in her book won me the match. And that was one of my reasons for wanting to write a book, that maybe one story that I could tell might just help one junior or one person kind of get over the line and change the course of a match or a career or something.
Have you had the opportunity to tell Chrissy?
No, do you know what? I'm so excited because my publisher texted me this morning, and last week she said, is there anyone, that you really admire who we might be able to send a book to, and, you can sign it for them? And I was like, probably Chrissy Wellington, but I've got no idea how to get in touch with her. And she messaged me this morning and said, I've got in touch with her and told her that we want to send her a book. And she wrote the most amazing reply and just said, I followed Laura's career and, what an amazing athlete. And I can't wait to read it. Thank you. And I was just like, made my year.
Wow, how cool is that? Especially that it happened this morning as well.
Yeah, literally this morning.
We're going to get onto your book in a bit, but just two more questions we have from some of our followers on social media, if I can find them here in my scribbled notes. Vicky asks, this is just a very interesting question. How do you define mental toughness?
Ooh.
Yeah.
Somebody who can adjust and find a way to adapt to certain situations on court. So I think when people say that, I hope that, maybe she's referring to the fact that people used to think I was quite mentally strong on court. I put my mental resilience and strength down to an ability to adapt to the changes in current situation, whether that be in the first game or at 9-all in the last game. I was able to change tactics, adapt to tactics, and also a huge amount of concentration at crucial times, the ability to relax, but not in like, oh, I'm going to just have a sit down and chill, like relax and have clear thinking at the hugest of moments, I think is real mental strength.
Good answer. Scott asks, how often were you in the zone? when playing, or is it never, because at the top level everything is second nature?
I don't actually think, I can't hugely think of a time where, I don't know if it's because a squash match is so long. The closest I think I probably ever came to being in the zone was when I beat Nicole for the first time. We were away in a tournament in Cleveland, Ohio, and for years and years and years, I just used to look back on that match and think it was my perfect match. Everything came together. There was not very much nerves there. I remember I'd done an NLP process before that on believing that I could beat Nicole, actually, and going from, it just felt like I was totally focused on each and every rally and each and every ball that I hit. And when I got to serve for match ball, I wasn't even nervous, which was sort of serving to beat Nicole for the first time, serving for the title, serving for the match, and I just felt like it was love all in the first game. So I think probably that was just one time, if any, that stand out.
So had you'd visualized that in your mind already of beating Nicole? You'd seen it already in the mind?
Well, not quite visualization. It was called an organic belief change, and it's an NLP process where you break down a current belief, which I believed was that I probably couldn't beat Nicole, if I was honest. And it was really quite hard because you have to get into that emotion, which as an athlete is not a place that you really want to spend a lot of time. But obviously, again, it's a place that you need to be if you're going to change it. And you go through a process, it's in the book as well, about open to doubt, I think is the next one. I can't quite remember the order, but you think of a time where you had a belief and you didn't think that it could go anywhere else. Maybe it's something like Santa Claus exists or whatever, and you one day it changes like that. For me, it was like my parents splitting up and thinking that would they would be together forever, and then one day that just broke. And there's a flick in our head where we go one day from believing that something is true, and then it's just broken. So you use that as an example, and then you step out, and then you come back in, and you step into like open to change. And that might be an example that I used earlier of, I didn't think that I could change my grip, and I managed to change my grip, and it really worked. And then from there, it's like I'm open to change. And then I stepped forward into, and I've got pieces of paper on the floor and stuff, and I stepped forward into my new belief, my current belief, and I become that person. And it was all about like stepping into the belief that I could beat Nicole. And on the back of that, it's so weird. I'd lost 9 times in a row at senior level to Nicole before I beat her. And I did this belief the week before I went, and something flipped in my head. And it was just, not saying I believed I could beat her every single time, but it was more that the belief that I didn't believe that I could beat her was gone. So it's pretty special.
Nobody beats Laura Massaro 10 times.
That's what I said. Don't know if that would have been true without that process, but yeah, it was unbelievable for kind of emotionally setting me down. And it's not always about the squash, is it, or the tennis or the golf? It's about getting out of your own way mentally and letting your squash do the talking.
Yeah, well said. That quote actually came from I think it was Vitas Gerulaitis, who was a tennis player back in the 70s, 80s, and I think it was John McEnroe, or I can't remember who it was, had beaten him 14, 15, 16 times.
Yeah.
He said nobody beats Gerulaitis 17 times in a row.
I don't know if yeah, like maybe, I think someone said it maybe in Jimmy Connors' book, which I've read as well.
It could have been Connors, yeah.
Yeah, maybe, yeah.
So I like that one. Getting on to the next stage of your life, and this is the last part of the episode. Some exciting things have happened in 2021. Obviously your book, that came out this year or last year?
Yeah, it just came out in June, so it's not been out that long at all. Yeah.
21, and also you're going to be a mother as well. So Danny and you are going to be parents. Some exciting things. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's all exciting. I'm kind of just starting to all get a little bit more real now with kind of starting to buy things, and definitely. Sorry.
Mini squash racket already bought?
No. I don't know. I mean, obviously it's going to be a little boy, so obviously I'd love him to be sporty in some way, and I guess Danny's going to be miles better at that than me. And actually, he said when we found out it was a little boy, he said, do you know what? I think you'll be a little bit better with a boy. And I was like, really? Why did you say that? He said, I think you'd have been a bit tough on a girl, especially the first child. Obviously, we have any more, but he's unbelievable. As you know, he wrote his own book, and that helped me unbelievably. So I would look to him to be a bit more balanced with that, and maybe we could get them into a sport that is neither in our it's not something that we're super knowledgeable about, so we can just be a parent on the sideline and enjoy it a little bit more.
Yeah, well, he's definitely going to have good genetics, so that's not a bad start. Your book, All In, as you mentioned there, was released in June 2021. Tell us a little bit about that. And you've already mentioned in the podcast a few stories.
Yeah, so I guess, as I said, I wanted to write the book for a couple of reasons. There hasn't been a female squash player that had written a book. As you know, James, Nick, Jonah, Peter Marshall all wrote books. I'm not sure if there's some female coaching books, but I was really keen to kind of fly the flag for the females. Obviously wanted to try and help a few people if I could through my stories. And one of the things in the book as well, which I think is a great thing, is at the back there's a list of all the books that I've ever read throughout my career, who whether it's psychological, whether it's self-help, whether it's autobiographies. I mean, my Harry Potter novels aren't in there, so it's just books that have helped me with my squash. And when I wrote them all down, there was over 100. And it's at the back, and I thought, you know what, this is why I wanted to write a book, because I've read so many inspirational books, and some of them have won me matches. The Chrissy Wellington example before won me tournaments, and I wanted to try and give a little bit back from that sense. So yeah, really excited. It was in the pipeline for a while. COVID hit, and we just didn't know when the right time to release was, and just thought, you know what, as it was coming out looking like it was going to be okay, let's just go for it. So with the pregnancy and COVID, it's been really tough to I would love to have done a few more tours and, get to some squash clubs and do exhibitions, but I'm really hoping the book is, timeless in a way. And obviously with COVID, I've been retired nearly 2.5 years, but it doesn't really feel like that. So I'd love to hear if anyone's read it and if they've enjoyed it or not.
Excellent. And best place to get it?
Yeah, so it's available on my website, and I think it's available on Amazon globally, and we're going to release on Audible in the next few weeks as well. So if you've enjoyed listening to my voice today, it's up your street. If not, definitely get it on Kindle or on paperback or hardback from the website.
You're easy to listen to, so I don't think that should be a problem. And your website is, what's the address? lauramassaro.co.uk, and all of the links to kind of buy as well are all on my social media, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Yeah, just under my name, I think, or LJ Massaro on Twitter. LJ Massaro on Twitter, and Instagram was?
Laura Massaro.
Perfect. Okay, simple enough.
Yep.
All right, thank you so much for taking the time to come onto the Champion Minded podcast. It's been a great pleasure. Definitely, I had another 10 or 11 questions here to ask you, but I've got to be respectful of your time. But all the best with all the fun things coming up, especially the pregnancy and with the book and everything. And a big hi to Danny for me.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. I've really enjoyed it, and I look forward to listening to more of your podcasts in the future.
I hope you guys enjoyed that one with Laura as much as I did. She was super easy to chat to and so interesting as well. What a champion. Make sure you get her book, All In. Mine just arrived yesterday, which I can't wait to get in. And definitely, if you're a coach or a parent, this would be a great book for your kids as well to read if they're in the game of squash, or actually any other sport for that matter. As always, this podcast is available on iTunes, Amazon Podcasts, YouTube, and via my website, allistairmccaw.com. Connect with me on social media. I'm on Twitter at AllistairMcCaw. On Instagram, BeChampionMinded, and as well on Facebook, Allistair McCall page. So until next time, remember, you were made for greatness. Now go do the work. Stay champion-minded.